All right. I'll do the formalities of the usual introduction to open a meeting conducted by Zoom. And so good evening to everybody and welcome. I'm Jean McKnight. I'm co-chair of the Housing Plan Working Group. And I'm also a member of the zoning subgroup, which consists of myself, Oscar Meritz, and Heidi Frail. And Oscar Meritz and Heidi Frail are also members of the Housing Plan Working Group. Heidi is a member of our select board, and Oscar Meritz was appointed as a member of the community. And we're expecting a few other people to join us, and when they do, I'll introduce them. And this open meeting of the zoning subgroup is being conducted remotely, consistent with current state regulations, and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting is provided via Zoom, but this meeting will not have public comment. And obviously we have a quorum. We have all the members of the zoning subgroup present at this meeting. That is Heidi, me, and Oscar. I'm not concerned as to whether we have a quorum of the Housing Plan Working Group. It was not our intention that we needed to do that. Let me also introduce Ed Cosgrove, who is a member of the Housing Plan Working Group, as an appointee of the Board of Health. Welcome, Ed. Glad to have you participating. And also, let me introduce our town staff, Lee Newman, our planning director.
Present.
And Karen Sunaborg, our community housing coordinator.
Here.
And Karen is the lead staff person in drafting the housing plan that we've been working on for several months and that we hope to finalize in a few months. So we're glad you could make it tonight, Karen.
Thank you.
There are only 2 agenda items, but I'll explain how we're going to go forward with the meeting. And of course, be aware that others, since this is recorded and since this is live for those who tune in, others may be able to see and will be able to see and hear you, and anything you share or state will be a matter of public record. And there's supporting materials for this meeting, including the agenda, that are available on the town website at www.needhamma.gov/housing plan 2021. We want to make sure when people speak that they are identified so that the public will know who's speaking. If we take any votes, they'll be by roll call. If people who are watching wish to make written comments in response to what they see discussed at this meeting, they can be directed to planning@needhamma.gov with the subject line Housing Plan Working Group. If so far we only have Ed, but we are expecting perhaps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more people. So I'm kind of mystified that we haven't had those people tune in yet. But if we do have that larger group, I want people to, when we get to the question and answer comment section, just, raise the hand or use the yellow raise hand feature. So because this is how how we're going to plan the presentations. I have a couple more introductory statements to make of a general nature, and then Oscar is going to address the agenda items. First, by going to number 2 on our agenda, and that is review of a preliminary MBTA district density study that he's prepared, and then going to particular zoning map changes. And when we're going through these, I welcome questions for clarification as we go along. But it may be best if people, take notes, whatever, and keep their questions for the end, because Heidi Frail is going to moderate a question and answer comment period at the end. So I want to start by saying that, the MBTA guidelines finally came out. And what we realize is Needham is characterized as a commuter rail community, as it should be. And that means we have to zone at least 50 acres to accommodate the number of units that our town is required to zone for, multifamily housing units. So that must be at least 50 acres, and 25 acres must be contiguous. But 50 acres is not really our goal, because if we're also required to have, given that the number of housing units in our town is almost 12,000, we're required to have 15% of the number of housing units we have to zone for that number. So that's 1,784 units. Now, to zone for that number of units at 15 units per acre, which is the minimum density that the MBTA communities guidelines require, you'd need to have 120 acres zoned for multifamily housing. Oscar's presentation will show the potential. Remember, I said 120 acres. He'll show the potential for 126 acres that can be rezoned within a half mile of our transit station to meet the MBTA, to meet and even exceed the MBTA guidelines. And one reason I say exceed is that we have the highest percentage. There's only 3 other communities as high as us. So the percentage of these units that we must zone for that have to be within the half mile, and our percentage is 90%. So 90% of 120 acres is 108 acres. So that's what we need, 108 acres. And even though our typical zoning for multifamily housing is 18 units per acre, the MBTA guidelines provide for certain land that will be excluded. So if you zone an area, for example, that has a protected wetland, that land kind of doesn't count. So you have to be careful and zone for something a little higher than the goal is to make sure you really reach that goal. And there's going to be a process where towns submit their proposals to Department of Housing and Community Development, and they'll respond and tell you, what their view is on how many acres and how many units can be accommodated in that particular area. So that's where we are right now. I mean, there's certain things we have to keep in mind. Certain things that we have done in our recent rezonings that have included multifamily, such as limiting the number of bedrooms of the unit. We can't do that because the idea is it has to be family friendly. And another thing that we have to consider is that a lot of our zoning for multifamily housing, although it hasn't resulted in that much actual housing in Needham, is in our Chestnut Street and center business zones. And that's mixed use with the restaurants, the commercial uses on the first floor, and then as much as 3 stories above that for residences. That's not going to work. The guidelines say you have to allow standalone multifamily housing. So we only recently learned that that was the rule, and that's caused us to rethink some of our ideas about Needham Center. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Oscar Mertz. And as I said, questions for clarification are welcome. And Ed, it looks like you're our audience here.
Yeah.
And so feel free to break in at any time with any questions.
Sure. Jean, I just heard from Natasha. She apologizes. She won't be able to attend.
Oh, Natasha is our co-chair. I'm sorry she won't be able to attend. And I'm also very sorry that people who I thought had a great interest in this, who seem, to just say they'd be coming aren't with us. But anyway, let's go forward, because it's a good way for the zoning subgroup to really get into our heads what we're doing here. And also, Ed, to get your feedback. You've been a long time member of town boards and a town meeting member. And so, all right, Oscar.
Well, thanks, Jean. So, Ed.
I'm getting singled out. Okay.
Yeah, no.
Hopefully everyone else will watch the tape.
This is yeah, exactly. I mean, this is important stuff, and we just wanted to have a chance to do this because I know it does take time, and we have a lot of things to do on our regular meeting nights. So thank you for coming. So I think what I tried to do with this cursory study, let's say, it's this study, the process of this was to try and understand how we would assemble contiguous land. And by definition, and you will see in this map that there are these zones that we've called out as contiguous. And so the lines that have the hatched line around them are contiguous acres. They actually keep going on the other side of west. And then this magenta color is actually the street area that you're allowed to include because it's all part of the contiguous acreage for that district. But at the end of the day, it doesn't get counted for the net area that you would be building on. So there's some interesting things that we will want to get clarification on when, as Jean said, we hand our homework in for DHCD to grade our homework. So what I did was look at the different districts, the different basically station half-mile areas, and try to understand where we would have contiguous acreage, and then see what it added up to. And in the heights, part of what you're looking at is the combination of areas that we have proposed to have multifamily. So the zones that are in this blue outline are either areas that are apartment 1 that allow for multifamily, or they're areas that are business or industrial or potentially general residence, where we've added the option to propose the option of changing those districts to apartment 1. You'll also see, so you're looking at an underlay map that is actually the proposed new zone. So you'll see there's an apartment 1 zone over here where we have Hillside School and the Crescent industrial area. So that's another discussion for us later. But what this is essentially saying is we've put together a set of proposals for zoning changes that would look at the districts that do not allow multifamily, and then propose that actually gets either added to the existing district, or we change that district to apartment 1 so it has that same level of density, which is 40 feet, 3 stories, and a maximum density of 18 units per acre, which is what the apartment 1 is for Rosemary Ridge and Rosemary Lake apartments. All those areas are already apartment 1. There are other areas in town. So what's interesting is that when you do those zoning changes, you can build these contiguous zones. And as Jean said, there's a minimum requirement of 25 acres that has to be contiguous, and then there's a minimum requirement of 50 acres that you would then be having. And as she said, 90% of that has to be, because we're Needham and we have 4 train stations, we have to have 90% of our multifamily area within the half mile. This is actually demonstrating everything was within half mile, so we have 100% of the designated acreage is actually in it. So if you take some of these areas, these 3 areas get you to 71 acres. That's just in the Heights station. And so we continue to move down, and you'll notice that what we've really focused on is the zones that are flanking Highland, and as we move down into the center of town and go down Chestnut Street, all of these zoning changes are essentially areas of higher mixed use density that currently exist, and that we're modifying, adapting so that they can actually allow multifamily where they don't have it currently. And that this is all obviously makes some sense because it's pedestrian oriented. People can walk to the train, they can walk to the commercial areas, and they also have the potential of access to transit, which is obviously critical here, and to a lot of the other uses supporting the town. So the density around this, call it spine of Highland down through town to Chestnut, is kind of the armature that all of this zoning changes is built around. So what Jean said that's really interesting about the MBTA is that their wording is you cannot require that mixed use, therefore residential over a retail base, is the only solution. So therefore, if we are to have the accommodation to the MBTA, you'd have to have it allowed as standalone residential. So what you see in blue is the downtown core blocks that are our overlay A and B in the center business district. And in these districts, we don't think we want to have any of that standalone residential that would come down to the ground. So we would not count this towards the MBTA acreage. So we simply have this as other ways that we can adjust our zoning to maximize the development of different kinds of housing types. We have lots of needs for housing of many sizes and shapes and prices. So we are looking globally at solutions to zoning, reform to zoning, not just for the MBTA multifamily, but for things like ADUs, to add units that would be more diverse across the whole, all of Needham. And then there are other areas where we may be addressing a change from single family, very specifically areas that are walkable, that have single family and could go to 2 family, but very, very locally, again, along this spine. And then there's some other areas that we'll talk about later, but that are parts of town where there are potentially some good zoning changes that would make it a little bit more amenable for people to be adding an addition or doing an ADU, working with setbacks and coverage dimensions that are out of sync with their lots. That's another discussion. So you'll see that we basically took the core out of the downtown and said we won't even count that for MBTA because we don't want to have to be limited to allowing the standalone housing down to the ground. We think it's obviously more valuable to have the commercial activity on the ground floor, have that be continuous. And so that center district has some areas that are interesting. Coming down from Sudbury, from the library, there's a zone that's business that doesn't allow multifamily that we think could. And then we have the Highland Court area, which is already multifamily. And then going down around St. Joe's and around the downtown core, which is in blue, we have the areas that are around the Greens Field, which include Stephen Palmer, the Y, and then the new buildings that are being looked at recently. Dorenzo came in and had some conversations with the planning board about 888 Great Plain, which is the Hillcrest Site. And then there's the Baptist Church and the Christian Science Church. So those zones actually
let me break in, Oscar.
Yes. Yes.
because I want to introduce Reg Foster, who's
Hi, Reg.
joined us. And Reg Foster is a member of, a chair of the Housing Authority, and Reg, and Ed Scheidler is here with us too. And Ed Scheidler is a formal member of the Housing Plan Working Group and also serves on the Needham Housing Authority. I don't think that there are any other attendees that weren't there at the very beginning. Are there? Hello, Penny.
And I apologize for being late, but we had to do an emergency board meeting that just finished a minute
Hey,
ago.
Reg, do you want me to back up?
No, not, absolutely not.
Okay,
Okay.
we're just
But
running down.
actually
through-
ask Ed, because Ed is here, so I'm actually just an attendee, but not a member of the committee here under these circumstances here.
Okay. And hi, Ed. So
Hi. Yes, Reg, we value your input.
Thank you.
But as long
Yes.
as I've broken in, I want to say something about what Oscar is showing. We talked about the minimum acreage requirement of 25 contiguous areas. And it seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, Oscar, that in each of our 3 areas, the Heights, the Center, and you're going to go on and talk about Chestnut Street going down to the junction, we can find more than 25 contiguous acres.
in each, yes. Yeah.
So I wanted to
Um,
summarize that. That's really good.
Yeah. So I think it suits us to not necessarily be following too slavishly to these requirements from the MBTA. So we actually maintain a little bit of control for ourselves, and the negotiating and discussion of potential projects in the downtown makes a lot of sense. And the vibrancy on the ground floor for the commercial activity is critical. So moving south is again, I think, probably one of the areas that we consider has a great upside, because it has a lot of different uses. It's got a lot of in a sense, challenges that we need to look at, including the pedestrian experience, the vehicular experience, the biking experience, all of that sort of important sinew that can really link us from Roach Brothers all the way up to the Muzzy site. It is all critical information. And so again, you have a double loaded set of area here that can line this and activate, energize Chestnut Street. So I think there's just a great upside to how this district could evolve with multifamily housing, and just continue to make it better and better. What we did do with the Hartney-Graymont site was keep that as part of this district. And although it has some restrictions on its entry-exit point, which is quite challenging, it does have, it's a great site for, and so we have proposed that this is an apartment 1 change, which put it in there at 3 stories, and a 40-foot maximum height and an 18 unit per acre maximum density. And I think that's probably well within what could be done there. And again, I think we'd like to see that and the rest of this Chestnut Street come together with opportunities. And so that's partly, I think, what we're all trying to do here is to set the groundwork for the ability for these areas to see either the assembly of some new parcels or combinations of parcels to get land that could be made into something that has some development density and has the ability to pencil out and be viable, and also produce great affordable housing opportunities as well. So I think what this was encouraging, albeit cursory, it's not something that I would say is going to continue, and we're going to continue to evolve this, get more information, do more due diligence on the calculations of all this. But I feel pretty good that this gets us an order of magnitude that's comfortable for us to start going through the first step with the MBTA. And I know that's something that's on Katie King's list, the select board and the planning board, who will be assembling that first submission for the MBTA by January 31st. So this may or may not be a part of that, but it certainly is a good first salvo for us to look at this, look at the numbers and see how this all goes together.
Oscar, could you do one thing just for clarification? Could you go back to the center? And could you use a cursor to circle the area that we're not going to say standalone multifamily is to be allowed?
So that's blue. Yeah.
So it goes there, all the way down to there and then
Yep.
around.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So it's this outline that has the blue, color. So that's both sides of the train tracks, and that's the land that's surrounding, the grid. That's the town green.
I'm
Town
not
hall right there.
sure that's quite right. Because we did talk about Garden Street, for example, which is
Garden Street is on the other side. And so I think what I did not do with Garden Street was include it because it's sort of a standalone. And I thought it might make more sense for us to be a little bit clear about this, but that is an option to try and carve something out of that on one side. Garden Street is, we talked about that piece of it, right?
Yeah, but I guess what's confusing is the same kind of blue kind of striped tape is used to outline areas that we are focusing on for MBTA, and then the area
I think he's using the fill color, James.
The fill color is blue. So that was, I didn't want to use two different stripes because they were running across each other. So it was going to be kind of strange, but I did change the fill color.
Yeah. Okay, then.
So this is this blue.
I misspoke when I said that 25.57 acres is contiguous in the center, because
It
it's
is.
actually not.
It is.
It is contiguous?
This is all contiguous. Yep. This is all contiguous.
Oh, and that encompasses 25.57. All right,
Yeah.
thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yep. So we basically stopped, we went to the either side of Rosemary and we said, so here's the boundary for, it's kind of silly, but we have two sets of boundaries. So this boundary is, so this is counted into the center district, and then this district, we're going to let that get counted, right? So it's sort of, we're not double counting anything, but we are.
Mhm. Okay, I understand better what's to be excluded and what area we are not recommending standalone multifamily housing in our center. Okay.
And now I have to remember how to erase.
Oh,
Have fun.
well, it was-
Oscar?
Yeah.
Yes.
Could I just ask a quick question
Yeah.
on one specific recommendation? I think I just want to make sure I understand it. It was, you talked about, I think, an extension of the Chestnut Street Business District to include the SNF property on Lincoln Street. So were you extending the Chestnut Street Business District, and is that what you're proposing?
Yes.
And so I guess my question is, why did you choose to extend the commercial district and not just create an apartment district at that location?
You could do it either way. It looked like instead of having spots of district or zone, I just let it. I thought it would be clearer if we just incorporated that into the overlay district. And maybe that does mean we have to change the underlying zoning is I guess it's in single family residence, right?
Well, I
So-
guess the only reason I raised the question is that because it's a budding residential property. So
Yes,
and so you're bringing really basically two uses close to that residential property. You're bringing the commercial use and a higher density housing use.
Yes.
I don't know.
Mhm.
So I think what was in our discussion was that this would potentially be a good parcel that could be combined with something that's on Chestnut. And so that parcel may have greater value because it has this access on Lincoln. If we could get that access off Lincoln and have that off of Chestnut. So I think one of the opportunities that we were hoping to encourage here was that site may provide for greater acreage when combined with something. And so you would be able to build something, and then we would have some zoning controls over its relationship and its setbacks to the neighborhood.
But one thing I wanted to make clear, and this is how we were able to get 25 acres up in the Heights, is that the 25 acres does not have to be a contiguous zone that is the same zone, as long as it allows the multifamily. For example, we were talking about the parcel at the tip down there on Chestnut Street. That would be just apartment A1. It wouldn't be business. And if we decided that, oh, really apartment A1 is better for that skilled nursing site, it would be the same thing. It could still be aggregated within the 25 acres with the Chestnut
Yep.
Street business with the standalone multifamily allowed. That
Can I ask a question?
yes.
Coming down towards the junction, and you look at that circle around the junction, the big dotted line reds, and then Needham Housing Authority property over there. Why can't we include at least the part that's within the circle as part of our, I don't know, what do you want to call it? As part of something that complies with the MBTA regulations or rules or.
Do you want to respond to that, Oscar, or shall I?
I think the challenge with the limitations on affordability are that they do not allow any affordability below 80% AMI, and they don't want any restrictions on housing on anything that would be zone multifamily. So I think we were erring on the side of let's not count on that because it has greater goals for creating affordable housing that is below 80% AMI, targeting 30 to 50.
I can see the point relative to affordable housing, but then why wouldn't that count towards our requirement to have so much affordable housing within, a distance of an MBTA?
They're not looking
station.
for affordable.
Actually,
That's what's interesting. They're looking for multifamily, and they're looking for families and senior and no restrictions. And they have specifically said in this latest draft that we are not, you're not allowed to set any thresholds that are going to put any undue pressure on development potential.
No, really.
They're limiting the affordability.
The affordability
Yeah.
is capped at 80, no lower than 80%.
And only 10% total.
And 10%.
However,
Okay, that's interesting.
So I mean, so we were just erring on the side of it probably wouldn't count. And we could start to look at some areas that might or might not count, but it's cleaner, I think, if we don't use the NHA land.
Also, we anticipate having to rezone for any development that might occur on that site, and we don't want to limit ourselves by having had it included.
Okay.
To put that site at a disadvantage in the
Yes.
future.
I think that
I see your logic there.
yeah, that's
Okay.
I think the more important issue, because we're very much focused on the apartment A1 zone, and that's going to be our template. We're taking that 18 units per acre and putting it here, as far as the zoning goes, but that might not be quite right. I don't think the affordability is an issue. And the reason is that you don't say anything about affordability, or you say 10%, which is what the Mbta guidelines say we can say. You say that in the zoning, but of course, the housing authority has its own rules. It's only what's in the zoning that that the MBTA communities guidelines is concerned about. It's not
Okay.
what actually gets built.
Okay, I see your point.
May I
Yeah.
jump in on a comment on that? Because I was wondering the same question that was just asked. And I learned something new every time, but yeah, there, right now, most of our residents are sort of in the 30 to 50% AMI category of life. So there's 152 senior disabled apartments at Linden Chambers, and there's 60 family units, again, all way below 80%. And we are required by law to, if we do any redevelopment, we have to replicate at least the same amount of affordable units, even if we're adding additional density, such as the duplexes in High Rock that we did 10 or 15 years ago, or something that we might be able to do on a more dense basis in Linden Chambers. So I thought that was an educational answer for me, if that's if things are the way that Oscar described them here.
I think we want to basically maintain, as Heidi said, the flexibility to respond with zoning
Right.
to
Mhm.
maximize
Mhm.
the potential for the NHA land.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not be held to, some other limitations
Okay.
that MBTA is imposing. And I don't think we're going to need to. So that's the good news. We can.
Yeah, no, I'm actually surprised that we don't need to.
So respecting everyone's time, and if there are other questions about this, please, I'll share this, or you actually have this document already, so just send questions. What I think is an interesting conversation I had today with Lewis Wolfson is something that I'd like to talk to people about, and I think it's basically a part of what what's important in this whole process is to really think through all of the land development issues, commercial real estate issues, legal issues of changing zoning, and in specific questions were about when we're taking industrial land and we're suggesting that should now become either apartment 1 or have multifamily added to industrial. There are a couple of ways to do that, but I think one of the critical questions that we need to sort through as a community is when we make those changes and there are existing uses that are industrial, and that those are vibrant uses, and there may be new future industrial uses that come online, and that if we're adding in the component of multifamily to this, what does that all look like, and how does that go together, and is that something that we feel strongly is a positive thing? It's an active, diverse environment. In many ways, it's a mix of uses. So those are there's a lot of detail in that we will want to get into due diligence on, so that we understand all of the aspects of these proposed changes,
Well,
where we are changing uses,
Oscar,
where we are changing zoning.
We're going to
Yes.
move on to kind of the parcel by parcel recommendations.
Yes.
And at that time, we can talk again about that particular recommendation and whether it makes sense.
Yes.
Are you going to put up the other
Yeah.
map for that purpose?
Do you want to go through the list of the text that we redlined first, or do you want to go right to the maps?
Going through the text works, and it would be hard to have both text and map on the screen at the same time. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So we went over this already once with our group at the big meeting, but we'll do this again because I think it bears doing it. And we'll start at the top of the list. If you can imagine that map in your head, one of the things that we picked up on when we were going through the fine tuning of and adjusting, refining the changes to the map, we were thinking that Greensfield would initially, we're thinking that would just be part of an apartment 1 zone, but the trepidation or the thought that that could go offline as green space was pretty, we wanted to make sure that that would not be at all possible. So we did not rezone that green space, but we rezoned the land around it.
Also, the guidelines make clear that that would be excluded from the acreage anyway, so it wouldn't do us any good.
Well, yes, correct. So we can include that in the acreage, which is what's nice about the new law, is that you can include green space, public buildings, civic buildings, and all of the dimensions of the streets, the rights of way, are included in your calculation of your average density. But then you are removing that when you are looking at the amount of acreage that you're going to build on and get your density. One of the things that we also wanted to do, and this is what Jean was talking about.
Are we going too fast? Is there a particular thing in that first section that anybody wants to focus on? You know, we talked about the former nursery garden center, and you'll find as we go along that we're talking about all the church parcels in town and considering them as sites for rezoning, even if it's not really likely that they would be changing their use anytime soon.
One of the things
within that definition, I'll accept that, but I don't want to. I'd be, in my opinion, it'd be a disaster if the Baptist church was rezoned, was turned into apartments.
You know what? We decided that because there is one church that we know already is likely to turn into apartments to be sold. Let's just put it that way. We decided that, and we know that this is a trend. We've seen this happen a lot in Newton, for example. We decided that it was safer to zone them for any eventual use. Of course, we hope that that's not what it comes to, but we have seen this kind of turnover, and we want it to be, and then once we zone one church that way, or house of worship, we wanted to just make sure that we were doing it sort of across the board and have a, so that's where that comes from.
I get the logic there. I understand that. What about the Presbyterian church on Central Ave?
I have to admit, I'm not, is that the one at the corner?
That's the one up by Newman, yes.
Newman. Yeah, so that one is included.
It's included in our list.
It's included on our list.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
As is Beth Shalom, which, you know, is a very vibrant place that doesn't appear to be going under anytime soon.
I don't see anything happening to that anytime soon.
Yes, but to keep a equity, you know, approach, we wanted to make sure we included everyone.
Okay.
May I ask you a
Are
question?
these comments coming from you, Ed? I can't see your mouth because your name is obscuring your mouth. Is that was you speaking about the churches, or was it somebody else?
Well, some of it was, yes.
It was you. Okay, good.
I have one more question about that, maybe to Heidi. So what we've seen you've seen in Newton, I'm aware of that happening as well. Does that generally make the church property more or less valuable by having that kind of zoning in place?
Well, I would expect it to be more valuable. I mean,
Okay.
Yeah, I think the challenge is if it's not zoned, if it's left as it's in a single family residence, then there would have to be a special permit process. You'd have to go through and propose changes to the zoning. So if we're doing it and this is kind of why when Dorenzo brought 88 ideas to the planning board a year ago, it was to understand what kinds of zoning changes they'd be looking for, Hillcrest Gardens, and if they were trying to accomplish some things, would they be able to get some additional density? And we talked about what would be their parking requirements, which is another thing we want to talk about relaxing some of those requirements. So all of this is basically leading to the point that Heidi made, which is if we are out ahead of the areas that are changing, that are these edge conditions to the downtown, it's helpful to think about them holistically.
Yeah, I think.
And
I
think
think-
about how they transition to our neighborhoods and where you stop it. So at the other end with the Presbyterian church, with the Congregational church, and that I guess it was an assisted living, or that building that is now, I think, coming back, that was in a lawsuit for a while. That's the long, skinny multifamily building. Those areas are kind of interesting bookends to the Hillcrest Gardens and the Baptist Church. They're areas that are adjacent to neighborhoods, but that have some density potential to them. And so I think they're careful. It's good to think about them holistically as the gates to the
Yeah,
town.
and I think we want to try. We're looking at this, obviously. MBTA is a big factor, but I think we also wanted to try to stop zoning for particular parcels, and instead to have an approach that we want, a town that we wanted to build, regardless of what's there now, to allow for that use in the future, because who knows what's going to change. But rather than like, oh, this site is up for sale. Well, wait a second, this developer wants to rezone for this. I mean, we sort of see recently that last minute changes are maybe not the way we want to go. So I think, looking into the future and, obviously hoping that none of these churches go under, but making sure that we have sort of a more comprehensive view of what could be, will stand us in good stead.
I'll give an example of that. We're not going to present this tonight, but Oscar has done a density study of 14 parcels in town that are developed for multifamily housing. And those that are zoned apartment A1 are come in at about 15, 16, 17 units per acre. However, what was the developer who proposed to redevelop 888 Great Plain Avenue, the old Hillcrest Gardens, was proposing a development that would have 50 units per acre.
Oh, no.
And, there was considerable opposition to that. And I also point out St. Joseph's Church, I think ever since the apartment A1 zoning came in the early 80s, has been in the apartment A1 zone with no harm apparently to the church. Nobody's ever said we shouldn't have it zoned A1, apartment A1. So
It's also, and Gene, to be fair, 50 dead in place is actually 29 units per acre, given and that's only 12 units, but it sits on a tiny little parcel, right? So those
which
numbers
one?
are
50 dead in
kind
place, yes.
they're we have to be careful about the numbers, just to look at the numbers and react to the numbers. Because again, it's the part of the reason for me trying to do this study and show people a variety of density numbers is so that you can actually get a picture in your head about what's 20 units per acre, what's 30 units per acre, what's 6 units per acre, what does that all feel like? And it will vary, because some of those will have parking that's tucked underneath, some of them will have surface parking. So again, depending on where they are, there will be some differences in how it's achieved. But anyway, it is, the numbers sometimes surprise you on the density. Okay, so Gene, this is going back to the next red line section here as we move down, is when we were thinking about Garden Street, the question that Gene asked was, are we, and it's how far outside of town, the downtown, do we feel we want to restrict the ability of housing to come down to the ground? That's the question. So where could multifamily be standing alone and not have it be a detriment to the vitality of the downtown? And so the thought was that on Garden Street, that's already got some interesting residential, multifamily, and so there's a quality to that street that could have both commercial uses and residential uses coming down to the ground without having it be dramatically impacting or negatively impacting the commercial vitality of the downtown. And similarly, I think to what we were thinking about on the other side, coming down next to Greenfield. So on those outer layers of town, not the main streets, but the next layers out, could have some of this housing that could come down to the ground, like Stephen Palmer. So that's kind of how this was added in. So we were beginning to manipulate the downtown areas where we wanted to have multifamily come down to the ground, and where we wanted to make sure that it would be sitting on top of vibrant ground floors.
Oscar, I think currently in the Garden Street district, the overlay, you can do housing down to the ground. Under
Yes,
the
you can.
existing-
Yes, and so what I think the question really is, from a technical zoning point of view, do we want to just call that apartment A1 and let it become a multifamily district, or do we and let it have some other, controls? And does that give us some latitude that we would like, or do we just let it stay as it is, as its own Garden Street, so here's where, there's zoning is so complex, gets to be so specific, that we're trying to, as Heidi says, sort of look forward and in any way we can streamline, simplify, collect, do things that make some sense, so that we don't create these unusual, unique conditions all the time. If there's a chance to do something that simplifies it or uses another zoning that's a little cleaner, that was the rationale behind that. So
And I would like to clarify with regard to Garden Street that presently standalone multifamily housing is not allowed. Looking at the study that I did on what's allowed where.
No, in the overlay it is multifamily dwelling by
Yes,
special permit.
but they.
by special
believe
permit,
They
right?
have to
By
be on the second and third floors above commercial.
Not Garden Street. Garden Street was different. Garden Street, you
Right,
can have
well,
mixed use.
I will revisit that,
Okay.
then, apparently my chart is incorrect, and I don't want it to be incorrect, I'll revisit that.
So, and to Jean, I think to respond to your question about why Crescent was not, or Garden Street was not included in the acreage that we totaled up for the MBTA, I think it's exactly that point, that it's a unique little location, so it could just survive as its own, and not have to be, because it's not contiguous, it just sits out there. So the MBTA is very specific about, if it's not contiguous, it has to be greater than 5 acres. So we're just erring on the side of caution.
I imagine it is greater than 5 acres all along that strip, but.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay, so in the Heights, this is really just more clarification of the wording, but what's proposed in the map is that we have an apartment 1 expansion north of Honeywell on both sides of Highland, because we have Hamilton Heights, not Hamilton, what is it?
It used to be called Webster
Green, but it's yeah. And then we have the Avery School as kind of bookends up there. And so filling down towards the Heights we thought that we would create some additional multifamily along that spine that kind of connects those zones and expands the Heights density, and adds to the multifamily around the train station. So that was
no, we're talking about rezoning areas that are now zoned single residence B.
Yeah.
When we talk about these.
or general residence.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Can I ask, what's the difference between general residence and 1B or 1A? Or...
General residence allows 2-family homes, and
Okay.
SRB is only 1-family homes.
Oh,
but
okay.
10,000 square foot lots.
General residence allows 2-family, and also allows the conversion of 1 family to 2-family.
Mhm.
So.
Okay.
Yeah. Going down through these business districts, one of the things that was this is just a technicality. What's weird is right below the library, the top end of Sudbury Farms parking lot is actually one zone. It's SRB, and then below that is business. So, and that was done historically, I believe, from Lee, that was going to help control the activity of street curb cuts going along Rosemary. And so what we're simply saying is that in the consolidation and the transformation of this corridor down from the library through Sudbury Farms, Bertucci's, and down to May, that zone becomes basically one contiguous zone. And we remove some of those outliers that are seem to be somewhat from a past concern that we would control with other ways. So the other part of this was exactly what you were asking about, Ed, about making sure that we were covering all of these other locations for churches. So the Temple Beth Shalom Presbyterian Church on Central Great Plain would be added in as another area that could be rezoned to apartment A1. And, you know, it's interesting that most of those sites are somewhat highly visible, accessible, larger size sites, good sites that are potentially, you know, we don't want to wish that on anyone, but again, those we're trying to get ahead and be egalitarian about how we treat these sites.
And I
Moving on.
break in because we list the neighborhood business districts, but haven't said anything about them. They're very small districts, and I doubt if they're even 5 acres. So that it's not to meet any MBTA requirement.
Right.
But there's more opportunity to have perhaps mixed use housing in these areas. In Hersey, of course, right there across the street from the station, that small business area. And then the business district along Reservoir Street and Central Avenue along 128. There's also a small business district where, but would
I have
you know, the idea is
question.
allow
But-
multifamily housing, whether it's even if it's only mixed use, and we're not trying to meet this MBTA guidelines here.
Yeah, I saw you were talking about the Hartney Graymont site up there a little bit back.
Yes.
I have no objection to what they wanted to build in there, but I voted against it because the exit onto Chestnut Street is so constricted. It would have been a disaster with all those people trying to get out onto Chestnut. There has to be some way, it seems to me, of working with the MBTA to create another, I don't know if you want to call it a tunnel or whatever, over to where the Roach Brothers parking lot is, so that you're not just confined to that one little teeny spot in between the 2 railroad bridges.
Yeah, that
Interesting.
didn't come up at the time of the proposed rezoning, strangely.
Well-
It was mentioned later that the fire department said they had concerns about the.
I think a lot of the residents had concerns.
I
But I
did.
will- Yeah, I think, Ed, that one of the things that we wanted to discuss in this whole scheme is to reduce the parking requirement, which would allow, obviously, for less parking, because one of the things that people objected to on that particular development was that it was touted as commuter residential and everyone had 2 spaces. So in the grand scheme of things, not just at that site, but all through this map, we've sort of discussed the possibility of limiting parking to 1 space instead of 1.5 spaces per unit. And also to change the height restriction on that particular parcel. if I'm correct, Oscar, I think we lowered the height from what that original proposal was. 'Cause I think that
Yes,
was
this is
5
capped at
stories and
40
we brought it
yeah.
down a little bit,
It's capped
which
at 40 feet.
doesn't solve the exit that you mentioned, but I think the idea is to try to get this to be done in like a more comprehensive manner. But on that particular parcel, you would maybe have less traffic. So the exit would still need to be dealt with, but that's not zoning.
Yeah, it was, I think originally a 5-story building was proposed and then they compromised on 4 stories, but people still thought that was much too visible at 4 stories but 3 stories might be more acceptable. But the access issue is one that needs to be addressed as it was Ed Carsgrove speaking on that, I believe. Mhm.
Yes.
So this next section is the downtown and Chestnut, and this was just some refinements that we were talking about when we were looking at the MBTA map, and about being clear about where we will allow multifamily to the ground and where we would not want to allow it. And so you see here that the terminology is changing so that we're being clear about the sections of the Needham Center with the overlay A and B, that there'd be no standalone multifamily allowed. So again, that's more for zoning clarity. But again, coming back to when we do the calculations for MBTA, you know, as Heidi said, not every single zoning change that we're going through point by point has to do with the MBTA. This is any and every opportunity we see to do some adjusting, refinement, enhancement to assist in housing, creating housing of all kinds and sizes and shapes.
And this 4C, I'd like to see what people think.
Yeah.
Around our town hall, when the zoning was changed for the overlay to allow multifamily above commercial uses, a height limit of 3 stories was kept in that area. This is saying, should we increase that to 4 stories, making it more feasible to have this kind of mixed use housing. So that's something for discussion. Maybe not tonight, but it isn't necessarily something that everybody would agree with.
So the current, just to be
4
clear, the
stories with the
current zoning,
setback.
the current, yes, right, with the 4th floor setback. But the current zoning allows 4 stories on the south side of Highland, and 3 stories on the north side of Highland, where it's wrapping around the downtown. So the question is whether or not an additional story would be detrimental to the experience of the respect of the town hall height. And so it's really a balancing question of, because these are challenging projects to come in and replace or to put together land ownership to be able to build enough of a housing project that would span a lot of that commercial space, or several, you know, a few of them, and then and be viable, because there's some embedded costs to do that kind of a complicated project. So the thought was maybe there's some benefits feasibility wise to have that additional story if the community feels that that's worth looking at and allowing that additional story. And we're saying basically you have the additional story, but that story gets set back.
Again, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I'm thinking to, the old State House in town, and, look at the buildings that are built around that, yet it still stands out. So I add another story around the town hall and the streets. I don't think that's a problem. The only problem I'd have is, I'll bet the people who own that building where we made them take the 4th floor off wouldn't be too thrilled.
Did that happen?
I don't know.
Right where the Salon Delaria is next to St. Joe's parking lot.
Oh,
They built that at 4 stories. and it violated the zoning regulation at the time. They made him remove the fourth story.
Oh,
I see.
goodness.
It's a while
Allow
ago.
them to Build it back.
Well, times change. Okay.
I know.
So
All right.
that I think is it. Yes. So that's the map changes that we had highlighted. So basically, we wanted to continue this conversation and go through the point by point. If it's now past 9, so that we don't have to do that. We can terminate. But the thought is, we could go through the zoning maps very quickly just to see the zones and look at the proposed changes that are listed here, in addition to the ones that we highlighted in red, if that would be helpful. Do people want to spend another 15,
Well,
20 minutes to do that? Or
Ed and Reg, do you want to do that?
I don't know. It doesn't. I'm comfortable. I understand what you were doing here. I don't necessarily need to see that, but
Okay, then Heidi, I mean, there may be, we may want to have a general question and answer. We expected a few more people, of course, and Heidi was going to handle that. We instead, because it was a small group, we had questions as we went along. But Heidi, do you want me to, just pass the baton to you, and you can see if anybody wants to have a discussion about any point that we raised.
Well, I guess that's up to folks. Are there any questions, either about, I mean, you asked your specific questions about the specific changes, but about the underlying philosophy, perhaps, of what we've tried to do here?
I got mine answered.
And
I would like
sounds
to-
like you're satisfied, Ed. Is that's your-
Yes.
yeah.
Hey, Ed, can we ask you, on these perimeter sites, this is something that's kind of interesting that we wanted to get your thoughts on. Both of you, all of you. So,
If it's on the other side of 128.
nope.
No,
So
no.
these are so you remember when we had there was a proponent who came and asked us to look at collecting, sorry, let me zoom in. Whoa.
Rezoning along Greendale, those
So
SRBs
this-
to SRAs.
Right. So there are several areas where this occurs, where there's actually
Okay,
SR.
I have to orient myself on this.
Right. So Kendrick, yeah, Muzzy up here. So when you come down
Yeah, okay.
Hunting-
I've got an idea
Hunting-
where I am.
hunting
Yeah.
changes, hunting changes to Greendale, but there's this area of
Oh, yeah.
SRA in this very strange location, but
Mhm.
the properties that were developed are more SRB size. This was brought to the attention of the planning board for a rezoning, and it was not
Right.
granted. But what
You remember
what
town
it-
meeting voted against it, Ed, right?
Right,
Wasn't
I
it?
remember that, yes.
Yeah.
So it triggered some interesting questions, and also we started to look at other areas. And so there's another spot that's further down Greendale that actually has some of those areas. And then what's really interesting is over towards Wellesley. There
Rolling it
along
back up.
Brookside and Rolling Forest, all of these areas,
Oh,
this is
mhm.
all SRA. So, and again, there's a watershed here for Wellesley's water.
Right.
So there's a lot of potential issues there, but the reality is somebody came up with a lot of smaller lots anyway. So we're not changing the density. The density is already there, right? They're not acre sites with houses every acre. Those are quarter acre, 10,000, whatever. Those are small, tiny, and they're SRB size. So, and we looked at this
You mean
and
they're
we said,
SRAs.
wow,
and
there's
SRA.
there's a remarkable number of lots that are of a smaller size. And so if you think about all those people having mismatched zoning requirements for setbacks, coverage, density, large house rules, all those things that would be kind of mismatched against them, given that they're basically living in an SRB lot size, but they have SRA requirements for their setbacks and for their coverage. So I think the point here is it may not be anything other than somebody get down the road who wants to go in and do an ADU, or somebody who wants to add an addition down the road has a lot more latitude to do it without having to go in for special permit, get granted and on a case-by-case basis. So it was an interesting thought to.
Yeah, well, I
It
think we
doesn't-
should be,
Yeah.
I think we should be much more liberal in our allowance for ADUs.
Mhm.
I don't have a problem with ADUs.
How do you feel about the ADUs as detached as well as the attached? What's your thought on that?
Well, maybe as detached would depend on what size of a
Existing.
unit you're talking about.
Existing detached.
If you had
yeah.
in a garage or you had an existing outbuilding that you could convert that,
I wouldn't
and
have. a
that would be
problem.
a special permit.
I don't think I'd have a problem with that if you didn't increase the building beyond its footprint. I went to
Yeah, I
college in
think it's-
Oxford, Ohio. And I lived in a converted garage behind
My
the
sister
house.
did too.
So did
And,
I. My first
Oh,
house.
you know,
Married.
Mary,
Yes.
I actually enjoyed it, so.
you did too.
It's a great way to be part of a neighborhood when you
Yeah.
are not
We
a
were friends with all
family
our
unit,
neighbors.
you know,
Yeah.
it's
Well,
such a
Ed,
good idea.
do you think if, we require a special permit for an ADU that's within the existing dwelling? I mean, you can add on to your existing dwelling, just like any homeowner
Mm.
can, as long as you respect the side lot lines and everything.
Yeah.
Presently, you need a special permit to do that. And of course, the way it's worded now, you can only rent to a close family member or a caretaker.
I understand why.
Yeah. And
Uh,
so do you think that we should get rid of the close family member caretaker rule? And do you think that ADUs that are within the dwelling should be allowed by right?
I think if they're within the dwelling, they should be allowed by right.
Mhm.
If you get into the separate building, I think maybe there should be a review of that of some kind. But as long as it stayed within the original footprint, I don't know.
Okay.
More
I don't think
latitude.
I think it enhances a neighborhood rather than takes away from it.
Mhm.
Totally
What
agree.
about detached ADUs by special permit in SRA districts?
Detached ADUs by special permit and what?
An SRA.
Single residence A.
Well, we
they
were
want-
talking about existing buildings.
Well,
So
why not?
an existing
I know
detached.
you were talking about it. I'm just throwing it out there if you discussed that at all, given the larger lots could accommodate.
Yeah,
I would think
Detached.
that's worth talking about.
Yeah, I don't see why, again, people would be upset about that if it's a 3-acre lot you're gonna put.
Well,
You know, that's funny. That's what happened was a lot of communities used the minimum lot size as a deterrent to the ADUs. Or they set the bar so high that and so you're putting, what's weird is it's socioeconomically, it's sort of a mismatch, sort of, but you have large properties that are further out of town that have the ADUs. So you're gonna drive, as opposed to somebody who's closer in who could have something and you're basically adding to the walkable communities already. So I think it would be certainly worth thinking about and pursuing. But it is interesting how a lot of towns have created such a high threshold for ADUs, and part of that was because they were basically using their acre lots or making them have to be more than an acre lot to be able to qualify for the ADU.
Well, I want to understand what Karen is asking about, because presently we make no distinction about
Right.
SRA or SRB. You can
I
have
know.
an ADU in either
So you're
zone.
adding,
I know.
being able to propose, to do one for a special permit as opposed to an existing building.
Well, I saw that you are suggesting that you can do an ADU in a detached structure if it's an existing
Right.
detached structure.
And you're asking,
So what I'm
me about
saying
it,
is in a larger lot,
Ah,
is
Could-
there consideration for doing a new detached structure that would be under special permit? Maybe because they do add to affordability, and
mhm.
if you
Yeah.
get rid of those caregiver and family members, just something,
That's good. That's a good idea. And it makes a distinction. And you can have a newly built accessory building in the SRA zone by special permit. But in the SRB zone, it has to be an existing structure. It's the idea. We could consider that, I suppose.
I think it's worth considering.
Mm. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, with additional land, it also makes you wonder whether you give them, is there a proportion of square footage that they have a cap to, like 25% of the residence or something?
yeah, you'd want to have some kinds of terms and conditions. You'd probably want to do design review,
Yes.
that type of thing.
Yeah, but I think it can be, I mean, my daughter lived in London and they have mews and little units on the back of the houses and the mews and everything else. And it's charming. And,
Charming.
what's wrong with that?
and
Yeah.
I was just looking for Ed Scheidler's face to give him an opportunity for any final comments or questions, but I think Ed has dropped off. Reg, how about you? Do you have anything?
I'm very impressed. I've been mainly in listening mode because I haven't been tracking this. And I think you folks have done a lot of work that I still want to digest. But I will chime in on the ADU thing. I think the other thing about the ADUs is, trying to enable them with as little restriction as, we collectively deem is appropriate. It also has the advantage of, I think, being our fastest route possibly to making, adding some additional units, as opposed to these bigger projects and having to aggregate all these little lots in the commercial district to try to get something that would be commercially viable to redevelop. There's a lot of heavy lifting to do that. And whereas if we could find our way to an acceptable, relaxed ADU area, particularly with respect, I think, to the having the caregiver and the and the relative thing. I think that's kind of a big showstopper. I think our ADU, the right to the ADU does that transfer as well when you sell your house, or do you have to apply for it again?
Well, if it's zoned for it,
yeah,
it's fine. Like if we change the zoning, it would certainly.
yeah. I think, but as it is now, I think it doesn't.
Currently, you have to reapply.
You have to
every-
reapply now.
That doesn't. I think
3
that's
years
kind of
or
a
something.
showstopper there.
You do.
And I also can see down the road, perhaps creating financial incentives for once we sort out how it's appropriate and so forth, financial incentives that would incentivize homeowners to actually convert their garage into a unit or something like that. That would be pretty short money for adding additional units. When you consider I'm looking at an additional 1-bedroom unit at Linden Chambers is costing like $400,000 or $500,000 for the redevelopment. You could have 50,000, 100,000, and all of a sudden have another 1-bedroom unit in somebody's appropriate garage. I think you have to look at the timing thing on the ADU one as well. But I'm very impressed. I just I need to spend a few hours looking at all the fine print on Oscar's chart so I can understand it. My
Hey,
one
Reg.
question.
Yeah. I think, as we alluded to earlier, there's stuff coming down the pike with you, with what you're doing for zoning changes that you're gonna want to talk about. And I think in your relationship with, the discussions with, the successful winning bid for Charles River Center to get the Militia Heights. So we sort of begged off of all of those areas because we know there's gonna be, worthy conversations to really figure out what's the appropriate thing to do there. So we would anticipate we're gonna probably make some mention of those areas in our report, but not necessarily have proposals for changes yet, but that we would pick up on all of that in due course, so that for the town meeting presentation, it's all wrapped up into the zoning changes that we're gonna want to consider with town meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely.
because we're finalizing this for publication in November.
Right.
And there's no way we're gonna know precisely what the housing authority needs for any zoning relief by that time, I assume, Reg.
No, but
Yeah.
by this time next year, we will.
Mhm, mhm, Yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
very impressed. I think that Needham has we actually have an easy route to meeting the state requirements relative to the MBTA guidelines
yes,
based on this.
yeah, I'm very pleased with this, and I think a lot of this is really feasible and not too scary. As far
I
as
agree.
having town meeting approve it.
I was going to ask, are there any, again, I haven't digested all this, but are there any big sort of open issues or, area? I mean, this seems like it's on the road to coalescing, but is there any sort of showstopper issues left or that you maybe haven't already mentioned? Because I didn't hear any tonight.
In
Well-
terms of passing the MBTA communities?
Well, and just in it coming together with an acceptable approach, to the town that also meets the requirements of the the intent, I said, the spirit of the MBTA community legislation.
Well, Ed mentioned the concern about access at Hardy Graymont. I'm sure people will have a concern about any rezoning to allow multifamily at that site for that reason. But I just want to respond to what you asked, Reg, by pointing out that if you look right at the center of the map that's displayed here, you look at the fuchsia area that's marked 3A.
Yes.
See, that's an industrial zone now, and it's got a whole mishmash of types of uses in it.
Mhm.
At the southern end, it's a lot of office building. I mean, medical office buildings,
Right.
and as you go up, you have truck terminals, all kinds of things.
Storage facility.
Storage facility, right?
Yeah.
I live right across the street from there.
Mhm.
And I think people who live across the street, and then the other side is just the railroad right of way, I think they'd be pleased to see multifamily housing go in there.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, it's a difficult site. You've got that horrible train noise. Maybe nobody will ever develop it, but I doubt very much if you'll have a significant opposition to that kind of a proposal. Now, when you go down Highland Avenue, going farther south here, and then we're talking about what I always refer to as the Bertucci's Plaza. Well, it's across the street from the Highlands, which is a beautiful multifamily development that people wouldn't see, I think, as unsightly or in any way
By no
would
means.
want to need them. So you'd say, well, look, we could have that kind of thing on the other side of the street too. It's
I would
hard for me to pick out something that it would really be objectionable.
Yeah, I would expect that the only dicey area would be along, where is it, in 2A? Is it in 2A?
2A, yeah, that's what I was just referring
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
They're called the Bertucci's
But I think
Plaza.
generally that there aren't
funeral homes.
huge, there isn't huge resistance to the idea of the MBTA communities. And I think having it be something that everyone in, or most towns in Massachusetts, the ones who are affected by this will be doing.
Mm.
It's really compelling to get people on board. I wouldn't say that I haven't at least encountered, in the context of the select board, an enormous amount of resistance to this, if that's what you kind of meant I think we'll see resistance on a parcel by parcel. People will have issues with some of these decisions, especially if they live near there. But I haven't seen resistance to the idea.
And another thing worth mentioning with regard to getting changes through town meeting is because of a change in the zoning act that occurred a year before the MBTA Communities Act that changed the quantum of vote from 2/3 vote to a majority vote for rezonings that accommodate additional multifamily housing or make lots smaller, like even those areas we were talking about with the circles, you just make it a lot smaller. Rezonings like that only require a majority vote now.
And just as a side note, just not really to do with your comment, Reg, but when we were in our select board meeting last week looking at this, Kevin made a comment sort of from a design standpoint, and Oscar, you'll appreciate this, that these are circles that on the map that Katie King provided were not circles, they were sort of ovals that looked a little funky. And we've seen that as well in our discussions. And she said that the reason that is because the train station is an elongated feature.
Oh, really?
It's not a point in space. And so when you measure
I see.
half mile from that, it's an oval. So I just wanted to point out that we took issue with those originally, but that was
No, that's
that was
like
the thinking
asking how
behind
many
that.
angels dance on the head of a pin.
I
yeah.
mean, it nets like whatever, a little
Mm.
itty bit more, but that was the reason.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
thought it was entertaining.
yours are just pure circles, right,
They're
Oscar?
they're much lovelier, much more pleasing to the eye.
One other comment I would offer as a new sort of a newbie to the subcommittee here is it's complicated though. And so one of the things I think is going to be a challenge is once, the great minds that have been working on this, once it comes together, trying to figure out how to boil it down to something that's more simple that
Could not
can be
agree more.
explained. That was my other takeaway from tonight here. Because, and I'm not, because I think there's the other thing that's going on here, and you said it at the beginning, or it's been said before now, is I think I hear it's either explicit, and I wasn't hear it before but it is kind of a rationalization of this whole hodgepodge of special districts that have grown up. And, it's an opportunity to kind of get things kind of more consistent and simplified. That was mentioned before, but it does make it complicated as an idea to get through, or more complicated to get through town meeting, even with just the majority vote as opposed to 2/3.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, there's going to have to be a lot of groundwork here.
Good point. Yeah. And we're excited to go and talk to the planning board and select board shortly. So that will be.
And Karen Sunenberg has been very helpful in that regard in taking some ideas that it might have seemed like a hodgepodge at first, because they're coming from different subgroups of the housing plan working group, and creating a document that presents these ideas in a better, more understandable way. So
I hope
kudos
so.
to Karen for doing that.
Well, you'll be able to, it'll be revealed, tomorrow, I guess. We'll have
Oh,
it draft out.
goodness
Yeah.
gracious. The future has arrived.
So next Thursday is the presentation. Trying to kind of finalize. Next Thursday, the focus is of our housing plan working group. To what extent will it focus on these ideas? I'm looking for what we said we're going to do next Thursday on the 29th.
We're gonna present the
Review of draft
draft
preliminary, draft housing
recommendation.
plan, yeah.
and discuss
Right.
the logistics for the meeting on the 11th and 13th.
So you're gonna be working 12 hours a day between now and then, huh, Karen?
I'll tell you, getting the draft in tomorrow is that's been the big deal.
Mm,
Since
Yeah.
our last meeting comments, putting the pieces together and getting that's the big piece. Yeah.
I see. Oh, that's why you
Karen, I was-
mentioned tomorrow.
Would it,
Ah.
would it be beneficial to Reg's point? The way we broke this into, I'll just zoom out a little bit. So you know that we basically we created these zones, right? So we have an ability to focus a conversation, which we're not doing very much around Hersey. And these are very, limited for their map, the density of information required. So we have some highly detailed maps, and then we have some minor maps. I'm wondering, in the presentation of all of this, if it would be beneficial to have a narrative or something that might be, a high level summary of the thinking that we've put to this. And so people understand kind of going in, and I'm just off the cuff thinking about that. I don't know if that's occurred to you.
I
Is
think
that-
that when we meet next Thursday, this will be part of the discussion for the
Yeah.
meeting on October 11th and 13th, and how we
Yeah.
want to all do this. I think that's, we really haven't touched on that much. And we need to decide on that. Obviously, if we were presenting for just the working group next Thursday, the entire thing, the amount of time we can spend on just this piece is probably going to be pretty limited. People
Oh, yeah.
have an opportunity to come tonight if they wanted to get more information, on these recommendations. But I don't assume next Thursday that this will be a piece of it, but, not in any substantial detail.
Yeah, no, agreed. I'm just trying to think about how to, when we present this, you'd love to have as much of
Yeah,
it,
think about
be-
it. Yeah.
be
May I make
self-explanatory. I know that's impossible,
May I
but
make it, sorry, I was going to make a suggestion, which is, I think it's not important to do anything for next Thursday. I think, there's so much left to be kind of put together. But I think
Yeah.
it would make a sense for us to decide, by the time we get to the public meeting, which is what, the 13th of October, is it? When is that?
yes,
Yes.
That's where there needs to be a sort of a simplification effort that starts tomorrow to try to figure out how to come up a level or two of detail and present it in a way that is understandable to an audience that
Yeah.
won't have any background or very little background going into this. And there's a real danger, I believe. It's a, once we get into this thing, people are going to say, well, how am I being affected? And, you're going to be guilty until proven innocent. How does that affect my house, my neighborhood, my everything? And you don't want to sort of, kind of.
Yeah. And I think we have
Cause
to be really
concern.
clear that this is preliminary, that this is from the working group, this is going to, as of November,
Mhm.
that, in the next year, when we have those compilation worksheets and we do a little bit more due diligence based on, DHCD's, their process, there will be a real process next year, because this is not it. People have to say, this is just kind of the direction that we're heading. The work has been done great. And I think this really does establish a real direction. But I think we have to be careful to say, not to give people the impression that this is the final thing, guys. So
Right.
that's premature.
Right.
And
I don't, I was
Alright.
gonna say, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but when I kind of look at the work that Oscar, that you've done, I almost see like 3 levels of proposals that are kind of happening here. One is you have a series of existing business districts where housing is already allowed, and you're just changing the rule from special permit to as of right. So I don't think people would see that as threatening. And then you have other business districts where you're introducing it in the scale of the uses that you allow. And then the third is, where are you proposing to have apartment districts where that you, as a singular use, where that's no longer allowed? So I don't know if it would make sense to kind of present it in that context.
No, I think that's good. And we should brainstorm, ways to do exactly that, Reg, and Lee, to take it and break it down and to let it be high level, digestible. And then as you understand those levels, you can drill into the details of the specific site changes and understand it in more detail if you want to go that far. But yes, what's the high level executive summary that establishes the points that we are
And
aiming
test
for.
it out on people, not even me, because I know too much, but people who are not in the weeds like we are. Notwithstanding what Karen said, you can say it's preliminary, it's not real, it's just getting your idea all you want. But, if people get off on the wrong foot about this, right early on, gee, my house is right in the middle of one of these areas that are going to allow these mega apartment buildings, and I don't like that. You just have to be very sensitive.
Yeah,
That
I-
people are going to jump to the wrong conclusion.
I'd also love to include, Oscar, some examples of different, like some pictures of different types of housing. I have to
Yes.
say that when I originally attended the DHCD webinar on these changes, when they were like sort of super preliminary, talking about 15 units per acre, it doesn't, I mean, you say apartment building and it sounds like it's going to be another, Charles River, whatever that's called,
High-rise,
Charles River
yeah.
Place. But it's really more like townhouses or bungalow communities or whatever. And I think it's important to show that, because people will be like, it'll take their DEFCON kind of down a little bit if they see what that actually means in terms, and you've done that already to some degree, listing some of the communities that already exist. But I
Yeah.
think, especially when we talk about along Highland Ave, if we're talking about, 4 stories, 3 residential over commercial, like showing that actually historical Needham did look like that. So this is, first of all, nothing new, but then also showing kind of what that might look like and how it doesn't have to be scary and, industrial looking, like that it could be very friendly looking. I think that'll actually help regular people understand what we're talking about a lot.
And I think that in
Picking
conjunction,
one or two of these that
I
Oscar's
think in
just put up.
combination, yeah.
Is that why you're doing that? Yeah.
Yeah, this was just a brief study that looked at a couple of things in town, and I think this with pictures
Yeah,
and numbers, so people could put a picture to a density.
right.
And
This is
so
what it
there's
looks like
been-
if it's townhouses. This is what it
Yeah.
looks like if it's two family houses. This is what it looks like if it's, clustered
Yeah.
homes, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
So
that's
that'll make
that's a
venue.
good example.
Much more approachable.
Yeah,
You
Well,
should add the Highlands, Oscar, because the Highlands, I think people consider particularly attractive. That's the one right on Highland Avenue next to St. Joe's, next to the school.
Oh, yeah.
The old
administration.
Highland School
The
used to be,
townhouses,
yeah.
yeah.
If
And
you look-
that's zoned,
It is
18
here.
units. It's
It's
zoned
right
18
here.
Court, yeah.
units, right?
it's Highland Court by Emery.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh, you've got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's right there.
So it actually ends up being a very low density, but it is zoned for 18 units per
And
acre.
it's very attractive, let's face it.
Yeah.
So go for the
And-
charming, because I, in my humble opinion, a lot of our sort of aging commercial buildings and storefronts are kind of grungy and don't look very nice.
Yeah, they're kind
But
of
not
ick.
offending anybody here, but I think there's room for improvement, and that we can, so we're almost going into sell mode here is all I'm trying to say a bit. I don't mean it in an untoward fashion, but presenting it in, light of the advantages and opportunities. Not the scary stuff here.
I'll see if I can get a nice picture of Rosemary Ridge. But I think Hamilton Highlands, Webster Green, I think that looks pretty good from Highland Avenue.
Hey, folks, I'm sorry, Jean, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's 9:45 and I
Yes.
need
Oh,
to
yeah,
hop
yeah,
off the
let's-
call.
let's-
So
Of
I don't mean
course,
to end it for
yes.
everybody. Stay if you want, but I do have to go. So I just
Well,
want to say.
let's have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So moved.
Right, do we have a second?
Second.
Yes, all right. Roll
you.
call. Heidi Frell,
Yes.
Oscar Mertz,
Yes.
and I am yes, and so the zoning subgroup meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks
Thanks.
everyone for joining.
Thanks, Reg. Thanks, Ed.
Thanks for all the
Yes,
work.
thank
Okay,
you.
good,
Very
thank you.
helpful.